For those listening or joining, this is Barrick with Confluence. It is 3:33. That said, we're a little short on members right now, so I'm going to give it just another minute or two, and then we'll get started shortly. Okay, we may have one or two more members join still, but I want to respect everyone's time. I know we've got a couple of staff members online, as well as looks like about 5 of our executive committee members on. I will give a brief overview of today's agenda, and then we're going to have what I hope is going to be a robust but casual and an informal conversation about what's been happening with the subcommittees, where we stand right now, and then get all of your input on some items. Before I do that, let me just cover the usual administrative items. This is Barrick Abramson with Confluence Policy and Strategy Group, facilitating the July 29th meeting of the 1296 Task Force, the task force on the rights of Coloradans with disabilities. Members on screen understand you will occasionally find me talking to people that appear to not be here. We are streamed live on YouTube. It is also archived for recording later. If you are a member of the public who would like to speak to the executive committee, we'll have time for that at about 4:45 p.m. At that time, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to need you to hop over here to the Zoom and drop a message in the chat to Carrie Steele or myself. On the note of the chat, we do ask people not to use the chat during this meeting, other than to ask to speak during public comment. Using the chat can be distracting to the entire conversation, particularly for anyone using a screen reader who gets those constant alerts and readouts. The other item I will ask members, if you're in a place where it's safe, comfortable to do so, we'd love to have you on camera during the conversation. And I'll also ask that the first time you speak, you introduce yourself by full name, and anytime throughout the conversation, you identify yourself at least by your first name when you do speak. Today's conversation has a couple of primary topics. One, we're going to give an overview of what's been happening with each of the subcommittees, what topics they've covered and generated ideas for, where those ideas stand in terms of getting cleaned up and shared for public input. And in the future, we'll start providing the reports to you on what kind of input we're receiving. We haven't received much yet, which will be one of our other topics today on stakeholder engagement, how we can best support all of you getting word out about these discussions. The final thing that I do want to do, and we'll do this after some quick hellos from some of the folks who have joined the subcommittees, I want to cover an important Supreme Court case that may affect how we're thinking about things. The Loper-Bright ruling in the Supreme Court overturned the Chevron doctrine and really relates to how regulations are treated by courts. And each of our committees has heard about this, and it is shifting some of their thinking. So we'll have a brief discussion about that today. Before I go into my report out, though, I know the Lieutenant Governor and Michael and Julie have all joined one or more of the subcommittees. And without getting into the really specifics of this idea or that idea, I would love for you to be able to share with your colleagues kind of your take on the discussions and the process and what you're hearing from the members. Lieutenant Governor, I don't know if you're in a place to join us for the conversation right now.
I am in the place to join you. I just don't like looking at myself, so I usually leave my camera off. And I want to say greetings from not so sunny Detroit. I feel like I should have Supremes music playing in the background. So yeah, I have joined lots of subcommittee meetings. I haven't joined many lately, unfortunately, with my schedule. But I think what I have been most impressed about is some of the weedy discussions that they've gotten into, especially the CAUDA rewrite. I think and their work is so extremely important. So I've been really impressed with the people that we've got there. I've actually been really impressed with all the people that we have on the different subcommittees because, they're passionate, they're knowledgeable, they have different perspectives. So many of them have lived perspectives, especially on the outdoor rec subcommittee. I think lots of people have lived perspectives, which to me is the most important thing that we can look at, think about. So anyway, yeah, that's what I'd say, Barrick.
Thank you very much. And I didn't mean to call you out. I just always want to show that respect. And I know how busy your schedule has been, so appreciate you. Julie, I know you've been on at least a couple. What's been your take on the conversations you're hearing?
Yeah, I've actually listened mostly after the fact to all of them, except I don't think I got the last couple outdoor ones, but I've listened to all of the housing, CADA, and government. Same. I've just been really impressed by the level of thoughtfulness, the discussion, I'm excited. I do have questions. I've actually gotten emails about sending stuff out, but I was a little unclear, so I've not sent anything out for feedback because it said like these two are ready and this other one's going to be ready soon. So I didn't know if we were supposed to wait. So I'm hoping that we will talk about an outreach strategy because we're certainly willing to help with that. I also didn't know if there was like a communications packet that was coming with it, or not packet, but if there was like communication we were supposed to use so that we're all saying the same thing. So I've not put anything out, but I was hoping we could talk about that. But I've been very impressed with the ones I've seen, which has been most of them.
Thank you, Julie. And I will own it if my communications were not clear. And I think we will definitely spend some time getting clear on where we stand, and Carrie and I getting clear on how we can best support you, whether that's draft language or graphics or other things. I think we're right at that point where it's going to make sense to coordinate on that. Mr. Stone, you've been on quite a few. What's been your take? What, if anything, has excited or concerned you?
Michael Stone speaking. Honestly, only excited. No concerns. I've absolutely been loving the sort of the amorphous of the process, and to see, and obviously with your guidance as well. For example, and I think I said this publicly on the last outdoor subcommittee, I was kind of on the edge of my seat, and I personally, I was shocked on how fast that meeting went by. It was 2 hours, and the amount of substance was incredible. So I'm using your word of excitement. That's all I feel. That coupled with a huge amounts of gratitude. So anyways, I can't wait to see what's next, and just as I keep going back to this, but just to see where we started to where we are, that process has been incredible. And I'd say this for all of them, all the subcommittees.
I really appreciate that, Michael. And I will tell you, as a facilitator, I enter every call with that same question about 2 hours. I start off, and particularly when it's a little quiet at first, I wonder, am I going to use this full 2 hours? Are people going to engage? And I find myself cutting off conversations at the 2 hour mark because people have really been lively in these discussions, as you've heard. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Barrick. Well, yours was a really good segue into what I wanted to say, and that's about your facilitation. I've been really impressed with the fact that you just don't let everybody sit. I mean, a lot of people could sit, they could fold laundry, they could do whatever, and you'll say, "So, Julie, what do you think about this?" And you keep everybody engaged, which I think is really important. And I like the way you keep us on track as to, okay, today we're talking about, the parking situation or this situation. And because there's so much to deal with that we could easily get off track, with all kinds of different ideas. So I appreciate your facilitation too, Barry. And you didn't pay me. So
no, I did not. And I so appreciate that. It really has been our pleasure. I know some folks question what we were doing when we spent the first few meetings, the first part of this year, really just letting everybody brainstorm and learn and listen and hear from one another. I think there has been a little bit of a method to the madness. I hope people are seeing because it feels like people are really drawing on all of those conversations to now put forward some really smart ideas. Rep Ortiz, I see you're with us now, and I was just giving the exec committee members who have joined some of the subcommittee calls an opportunity to reflect less on the specific ideas put forward and more on the dynamic and the process that they're hearing and how they're feeling about it.
Yep, absolutely. I think in attending these meetings, it's been really good for the most part, because generally, even the subcommittees that I thought were struggling to try and get their footing are really starting to come into their own now. I can tell by the conversation, the focus of those conversations, and even though you're saying not talking about specific ideas, so I won't, but even the specific ideas are really heartening. A lot that that was the point of these subcommittees, a lot that I wouldn't even thought of by myself. And that's exactly why I wanted to have these subcommittees, because no one person can have all the good ideas. So it's been really rewarding to be a part of them the last month and a half here. We had some growing pains and some conflict, but I go back to your statement that you always say that's very apt, where we can disagree without being disagreeable, right? And that's what can also, that type of controlled combat can spur good ideas too. And it's been a part of it. So it's been really great to be a part of.
I appreciate your take on it. I appreciate how many of the meetings you've joined, and we will certainly in a few minutes get into specific ideas as we go through each of the committees. As I mentioned at the top, because it is now shaping the conversations among each of the subcommittees, I want to hit briefly and make sure everyone is familiar with the Loper-Bright ruling, which related to the Chevron deference. And I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer, much less a judge, but to give a very brief read on this. The Chevron deference comes from a 1984 case that was between Chevron and the National Resource Defense Council. And it essentially was litigating whether a judge needed to look just at the law as Congress had passed it, or what weight needed to be given to regulations that were enacted and promulgated by an agency. In that case, it was the EPA, to implement that law. And the courts ruled back then that the Supreme Court ruled that a court or a judge needed to give the same deference to those agencies as they would to the law, or rather than their own judgment. In the Loper-Bright case, which came from a totally different sector, it came out of laws relating to the fisheries and whether fisheries needed to carry certain monitors and bear the costs on them. But ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled to overturn what had been decades of precedent. And it said that a judge was free to consider, but didn't need to substitute that agency's rules for their own judgment. The way this comes into play, we had a great example today on the rewrite committee. In the ADA, when we talk about accessibility, it doesn't actually spell out that a door must be a certain width. So while a judge could look at the regulations that call for, say, 32 inches, in theory, with this hearing or with this ruling, a judge could now say, well, the wheelchair is 31 inches wide. I think it only needs to be 31 1/4 and ignore those regulations. The reason this is now coming up is our committee members, particularly the CAUTA rewrite, are talking much more about what do we need to put into law versus what can we count on and the rules or the regulations promulgated under that law. So they're starting to lean towards much more specific language in the laws. Rep Ortiz, I know you and I had a chance to talk about this on another one. Is there anything you want to add about the Loper-Bright ruling, the Chevron deference, and what that means for policymaking?
So as it relates specifically to this task force, I think we're going to, especially on the executive committee, because in the discussions, we've been very clear that the subcommittees don't necessarily have to be specific because they might not have that legislative experience or whatever it might be, right? I really feel like that's going to be on us as the executive committee to take their recommendations with this ruling in mind and make sure when we pass that forward that we are as specific as possible now because of this. We have to be. Otherwise, it's going to be sent to the courts anyways, and we're going to have these issues, and it's going to take longer to secure that basic access or to secure that basic equity. So I think as it relates to the executive committee, just be ready for that. I think that's where we need to pay more attention, unless you see something else, Barrick, on top of that.
I do not. I just wanted to put it on everyone's radar and leave a couple minutes. I think Rep. Ortiz is absolutely right. The process is subcommittees have developed ideas. They're getting feedback from the public on a rolling basis, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They'll then develop recommendations that they'll be putting forward to you in a couple of months. You all will have to add some meat and specificity to them, and I just wanted to put that on folks' radars. Before I move on into the discussion of the subcommittee's work, does anyone have questions about that Supreme Court ruling at the high level? Because I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer for you. Julie, please.
I'm also not going to pretend to be a lawyer. I mean, I think what I'm hearing in I've been to a few webinars now on this, and what I'm hearing in the civil rights and health spaces, no one knows, but that this has been the trend for several years now. And so this isn't like, people don't see like a huge seismic landscape shift, at least in a lot of our world. I think there are other areas where there might be a seismic shift, like particularly in environmental and like industry related health and safety kinds of regs, which is the mother of a helicopter pilot, scares the hell out of me. But but in terms of like healthcare and those things, people just feel like this has been coming. And so, but what they said, what's going to make it really hard on a federal level is they think it's going to chill new legislation on a federal level. So like what we have is what we have, because a lot of times the way deals get made, and I think this happened on a state level too, but this doesn't apply to the state, is the way deals get made is, okay, we'll pass this and then say the agency is going to do regulations rather than put every detail in law, which is a better way to do policy. But they think, some of the experts I've heard think that's going to be what gets chilled, which will make it harder to do anything bipartisan if it could be any possibly harder than it is now in DC. And I don't know that can happen, but there's the theories are all over the map as to like what actually might change. But I still think it's a horrible decision, but that's just some of what I've heard from people who practice on federal, people who do national work on federal policy matters. And I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have heard the same or different.
Same.
Well, thank you, Julia, and thank you, Rep. Ortiz. I'm going to use that to segue into, I think it's a perfect opportunity as we start talking about subcommittees to talk about the work of the COTA rewrite, which probably has the most conversation on this topic and on the subject of both law and regulation. Let me first, we'll talk stakeholder engagement after we talk subcommittees, but I want to be very clear about how the committees are approaching these ideas. It's ending up taking several phases. It's an iterative approach. What we do with each subcommittee is each meeting is dedicated to one or two topics. And I'll speak to COTA first. We had a conversation that was specifically dedicated to emotional distress damages and the rights of claimants or plaintiffs to pursue emotional distress damages and even punitive damages in the event of certain claims. In the case of COTA, we're looking at adding that as it relates to certain employment discrimination cases. We have the conversation where they've now done the brainstorming in previous months. We had a conversation specifically to surface ideas that may become recommendations. And I want to emphasize they're not recommendations. They're ideas that may become. At times, some of these committees have floated two ideas to address the same barrier, one more aggressive perhaps, and one less so. Once we get done with the meeting, Carrie and I sit down and try to clean up those ideas into plain language that can be shared with the public, for the public to provide responses of what do you see as the strengths, what do you see as concerns, what do you see as details that would be important. We want then take those cleaned up ideas back to the committee for them to give us their soft sign off on, and then get them up on the website. So ideas are being posted on the Engage Dora website on a rolling basis, usually one or two topics at a time. In the case of COTA, we just went live today with their first two topics that took a little more workshopping. One of those was emotional distress damages. The other idea that they put ideas together around was around exhausting administrative remedies and timelines for filing complaints. That group has now also had conversations as recently as today about things like some of the definitions that they may want to either revise, write from scratch, or where we have definitions that are in the ADA and are simply referenced and incorporated by reference into CADA. They want to talk about putting those directly into Colorado law for a variety of reasons. One, in case something happens with federal interpretation, or two, there's just the change to federal law. We also, with that group today, we're talking about incorporation of certain standards and regulations directly into Colorado law. You won't see this up on the website yet because it just came from a conversation 2 hours ago, and we're still cleaning it up. But in 2010, the DOJ issued their regulations around accessible design, and they're broadly referred to as the 2010 design standards. Those in some states, including places like Texas, have been incorporated by reference into state law. Because of the Loper decision, our subcommittee today was discussing the idea of literally copying and pasting all of those regulations, the 2010 DOJ standards, and putting them into Colorado law. So those are the topics that group has addressed so far. They've talked emotional distress. They've talked about caps and modernizing the limits on damages. They've talked about exhaustion of administrative remedies, as you've seen. And now they're having this conversation about public accommodations and about incorporating standards. And they're talking about some definitions. Those conversations around accommodations and around some of the definitions, and the definitions we discussed today ranged from things like, what is a reasonable accommodation, and does that need to be more clearly articulated? What is an undue burden? What is harm? So those will continue across their next conversation, which is on August 12th, at which point they will then get up on the website. But that's generally how each of the committees is approaching it. Let me pause, though. I'm curious if folks have had a chance to look at what was in the link that we sent, or if you have questions about what's happening with the CADA Rewrite Committee. Michael, jump in. I see you come off mute.
Thank you. I think somebody started to speak. I don't want to speak over anybody.
Sorry, this
Michael
is Julia.
speaking.
I'm just confused about the link. What link?
There was an email sent to all members, and Carrie, I can probably get this in the chat against my own norms, but a link was sent about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, with a link to a series of folders with all of the ideas being generated by each subcommittee. Did you not receive that, Julie?
I can look if I just know the date. I have a lot of emails from you guys. I can look.
I understand. I'm going to, in this one case, violate my own rule with apologies. I'm dropping the link in, and I'm going to ask Carrie to send it around by email again. What we are doing is, as each group has ideas refined, we're putting them into a set of folders where the members of that committee go in to give us feedback, and we wanted to give you all a preview. Michael, why don't I bring you in, and then I will walk through some of these ideas.
Great, thank you. Michael Stone speaking. My first glance of the last topic, especially with sort of the cut and paste idea, and this has always been a little bit of a concern of ours from the beginning. So this is sort of a question / concern. Sometime when if we're going to be focusing on, if you will, just copying and pasting existing regulations and so forth, one of the biggest challenges that I have is around the word compliance, because I feel that has been an area of misunderstanding and also a lot of vagueness. compliance, we've been saying this from the beginning that a lot of this has been a floor. Compliance is significantly a significant less standard than the need. And I don't want to get too far from what is the need. I feel that these subcommittees have worked very, very hard on defining the need. They've been going from the idea stage into now implementation. And I'd like to see a great focus on moving beyond a very, very low standard, which is in fact the way that I see compliance. I can't begin to tell you how many times that is, and I've had my own perspective on this, and I've said this as well. I came out of business school right when ADA came out, and I went right into the real estate world with development, and specifically in hospitality assets and other things. And I watched the way it started to where we are now, and so I get very, very concerned, and I feel that we right now have this opportunity, and I think that we agreed on this from the beginning, to do better, to improve on those standards. So that's really that's just it's a discussion point that I certainly think that needs a little extra focus.
Michael, I really appreciate you flagging that. And I want to say, I don't think the rewrite committee has suggested taking too much of the law and incorporating by reference. And in fact, they've looked at a number of the ADA definitions and said that's insufficient. The copy paste was specifically related to the 2010 design standards. But I'm going to take what you say to heart and really work with that group to push to see if there are areas that we need to review. Rep Ortiz, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, you hit it well. I mean, you stated what I was already thinking, is that the CATA rewrite committee doesn't mean to just copy and paste and stop there. Because if you look at the notes, you're talking about getting rid of administrative exhaustion as it applies to employment law, because that's something that we already did when it came to everything else, which I think is aspirational. That's not just trying to copy and paste. And they're talking about, oh my God, I just read the other recommendation, because there was two on that file, are both very aspirational. They just want to make sure that we don't end up taking steps backwards because of the Chevron decision that just happened. So that's the way I read it. And if I'm misunderstanding that, Barrick, or misstating that, let me know. But there are two recommendations specifically I'm all in support of: no caps, and then getting rid of administrative exhaustion.
Yep, that's exactly right. And let me go to Julie, and then I'll give a summary of what ideas that they have at it, which I think Rep Ortiz hits on pretty well. They're pretty bold ideas they're putting forward. Julie.
So I guess I had not seen the file. So when I open the rewrite ideas, are you looking for us to make suggestions on this document, or are you just showing us what is going to, I assume that these questions to the public will come out in some format that's easy, like not a Google Doc, but a format that's easier to provide feedback. Is there anything you want us to do with these documents?
No, I appreciate you asking, Julie. It's really to keep you fully informed. So let me walk through. These are the documents that we put together to work with each of the committees, and they provide comment. Once we've resolved all of their comments, we're putting them up on the Engage Dora website, which Carrie will circulate again. Once they go up on that website, that is where we are asking the public those questions that you see at the top of this. We're trying to give the committees broad room, since they've been discussing these so much, to develop the ideas. They'll get that feedback from the public, which we will talk about today, you all helping us get more public engagement on it. They'll consider that input, they'll revise their ideas into recommendations and bring them to you. This is really our way of keeping you fully informed. And what I would say, just to, at the highest level, summarize where rewrite is number one, they are saying that Colorado law should provide that an individual with a disability who is discriminated against in any situation, whether that's housing, employment, or public accommodation, should have the right to pursue and recover emotional distress damages. They are also putting forward the idea that there be additional punitive damages if it can be shown that it was an intentional bad act. So that's where they are with respect to emotional distress. The other big topic that group has tackled, excuse me, I guess it's two. One is administrative remedies, the other is timelines. As Rep. Ortiz noted, this group has put forward the idea that would allow a claimant or a plaintiff to opt out of administrative remedies and to instead, at their discretion, bypass that. They're also recommending that we standardize and align the timeline or the statute of limitations to 3 years for any claim of discriminatory action by an individual or against an individual with a disability relating to housing, employment, or where we're talking about a public entity relating to public accommodations. For those not familiar with the details of them, some of these different standards range from 3 months to 300 days to 365 days. And what that committee has put forward is that they should all be standardized at 3 years. In addition to their ideas, they're seeking public input from around requiring or remove the requirement for exhausting administrative remedies and their ideas around emotional distress damages. Any questions? And again, this is, we're not looking to you to say, I like this one, I hate this one, this should be changed, but thoughts on how this group has approached their charge when it relates to some of these topics. Rep. Ortiz.
I mean, from the very beginning, to me, the subcommittee has always been on point. They have some really sharp and experienced minds on this subcommittee. So I've been very pleased with the discussions and the work they've done since the very beginning. So this is definitely, these recommendations to me demonstrate that. And I'm excited to see them finish it out and see what they finally put forward to us.
Thank you. And again, we're going to come back to all of you with a discussion about how to effectively and robustly engage stakeholders. Recognize we're putting things on a rolling basis. We're going to have to figure out how to keep people engaged. And I'll talk about the thinking behind that in a minute. Let me go to the government subcommittee and kind of walk through the process they've been going through and where they're going to go next. The first topic they developed ideas for was barriers to running for and serving in elected office. Those are the ideas that are now live. They then had a conversation about being employed by a government or government agency. We're now moving, those ideas are getting cleaned up to be shared for public feedback. We'll then be moving into conversations with the government subcommittee about participating in government discussion. And we'll be having a conversation about accessing government services. And Julie, I know you and I have emailed about one situation there that Chanda brought to that group. It's been fantastic. I think members of this exec committee have sent folks with lived experience and unique challenges to be raised to each of these committees. I'm going to invite Rep. Ortiz in just a minute, since he is an elected official and has heard a lot of these conversations. I will say this is one of the areas where I have heard this subcommittee generate some of the most robust ideas on what should be required. And when you look at the ideas on that document, it starts off with things like any venue or facility used needs to not only be certified, it needs to actually be accessible, and somebody needs to actually confirm that. They offer ideas about having an ADA coordinator, and specifically someone who doesn't have another conflict, like being the risk manager for the city or the county or the state. They want to see a single, fully accessible, multi-format resource outlining all of the election processes. I'm not going to read through all of these right now, but you'll see they've got 8 different ideas about running for office, 6 ideas about serving in office. Let me go to Rep. Ortiz and then to the Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with a lot of these. Some of these are extremely aspirational, which I love. The specifics that we'll have to get into details of is every jurisdiction. What does that mean? Are we talking about, because different ideas have been floated. Does that mean every county except for municipalities that have above a certain population? Like, what does that mean? And so we'll have to dig into defining what that means, if that's what we're going to require. This idea around a demographic note, I felt like there were 2 separate ideas where any legislator can request a demographic note on any bill on how it impacts community living with a disability. And I think there was a separate idea, which I'm not seeing on here, is creating an auditing process for fiscal notes that are in question. Meaning, it's like, and I'm going to give a very specific example that happened this year, was the virtual participation. And the fact that departments for the state already allow their staff to work virtually and hold meetings virtually. They already have that infrastructure. And then they're allowed to inflate a fiscal note up to $1 million when we already did this during COVID, and where their staff actively does this, that are able-bodied, by the way. No, they don't get to do that. There should be, I feel like that demographic note idea was two separate ideas, and they're being merged for some reason into one. So just a point of clarification there. But all of these other ideas are really good. I think the bottom line is that whether we're talking, I know we're focusing on electeds, but I love the idea of Secretary of State having putting out best practices, especially for parties, on how to be accessible for candidates that are running for office. I think that's great. And then making sure that these workspaces, whether it's county offices or city offices or state capital, be accessible, for those that have disabilities, whether we're talking about those that are blind, those that are deaf, or those that have mobility disabilities or an intellectual or developmental disabilities. So I think they're moving in the right direction. My only point that I wanted to make sure to call out was the fact that, because I was a part of that meeting, that those were two separate ideas. The demographic note is separate from the idea that was put forward on auditing when we get slapped with a frivolous, what we consider in the disabled community, a frivolous fiscal note, especially when it's ridiculous as when able-bodied staff workers are allowed to meet and work virtually, but all of a sudden you don't want electeds and constituents to participate virtual? No.
Thank you, Representative. And I will have to go back and look at my drafting notes on why those two were consolidated. I appreciate you calling it out. And when we get the feedback, I will bring back to the committee your reminder about separating those out into two. I also, before I bring in the Lieutenant Governor, I just want to, highlight a couple of things that Representative Ortiz, raised there. These subcommittees have been the ones that have had the time to really dig into these issues. But as the representative said earlier, they're not mostly lawyers or policy wonks. We've got a lot of advocates. We've got a lot of people with lived experience. I don't mean to diminish their expertise, even in the policy world, but I think their real role is to surface the aspirational ideas that are informed by public feedback, and then we'll bring them to all of you to craft what should be the legislative recommendations. And that's where we're going to need to layer in things like, what is the timelines for implementation if you want to go there? What are the enforcement and compliance mechanisms? And it may be that you end up splitting some things out into multiple pieces to address any concerns about the process. Let me go to the Lieutenant Governor and then to Julie.
Thanks, Barrick. And I'm speaking a little bit out of school because I wasn't there. But it was my understanding I don't know how many years ago it was, the time just runs, when we had a city councilman running for office. There was two events, Denver City Council, there's two events that he went to. One, the facility might have been accessible. He might have been able to get through the door, but where he was supposed to speak, wasn't accessible. So I think we need a little more specificity for number one. And then I think the second facility that he went to, or location, it was, quote, ADA compliant, but what does ADA compliant mean? It was my understanding, and Julie probably knows this better than I do, or Josh or Rep Ortiz, that a lift is not a lift, that some of them can carry manual wheelchairs, but some of them don't have the power to lift up an electric wheelchair. So I think that we need to make sure that not only is it ADA compliant, but that things are working. Because when I was in the House, we had kind of a lift kind of a thing where people with disabilities could come up into the lobby, but half the time it wasn't working. So I think that's really important as well.
And Julie, if you don't mind, I want to bring the representative in on that, given his real world experience. And we did hear that, Lieutenant Governor, and even things like where the lift was possible, that meant one seat where an individual with a disability could sit, one place where they could be, and it limited the full ability. Rep Ortiz, do you want to add anything to what the Lieutenant Governor?
Lieutenant Governor is 100% on point. She is 100% on point there. And the priority should be non-mechanical if we can help it, right? The lift that she's talking about into the lobby, there is enough space in that building, especially coming off the House, for example, to build a ramp that goes up to the lobby. So we're not dependent on a machine that can malfunction, right? That can not work. There is a way to make the entire chamber accessible. I know there is. Architecturally, I know there is. But I keep hearing from colleagues that have no experience in architecture, like in architecture at all, or engineering, say, well, look at the way this building is set up. That's really difficult, or I just don't see it. And it's like, it's not for you to see. This is doable. Hire the right people and make it happen. So Lieutenant Governor is 100% on point. Like, even if we do, when it comes to us, we need to be specific that it should prioritize non-mechanical means of access, meaning a ramp, right? And if it's going to be a lift or mechanical, that it's not just about manual wheelchairs, that it can function for all modes of mobility aids, and then also create a timeline on if they're broken, when they have to be fixed, especially given that we have lobbyists and electeds that live with a disability and that serve with a disability, right? So like all those things need to be taken into consideration. Lieutenant Governor is 100% on point there.
And Rep. Ortiz, remind me, because I've heard you tell the story a couple times of, I want to say it's a century-old military fort that they've managed to make as a national park fully accessible.
Yeah, Fort, oh my gosh, it's in upstate New York. I'm spacing between William Henry or Ticonderoga. And someone mentioned the Acropolis, that even the Acropolis, which is even more ancient, is accessible and has an elevator. So like, I mean, we got what was Martha's Vineyard, right? Is that George Washington? Like, they made the first floor completely accessible. I mean, obviously not the upstairs, but like, if these actual historical sites, actual museums, and that's all they're dedicated to, they're not places where people do business or or govern, can be accessible, then the excuses on places where we can serve in elected office or as constituents engage with our elected leaders, those excuses are done and they need to be done. And we need to move forward on making them truly accessible and equitable.
Thank you, Rep. Julie, I'm sorry about the delay there. Let me get you in here.
No problem. A couple things I wanted to follow up on, and I do think the jurisdictional issue should be fleshed out because, for example, like my understanding is there's like a water district somewhere like way south that has 18 people in it, and that's a jurisdiction, like special, so I do think that should be fleshed out a bit. But I do think, so Rep. Ortiz, first of all, we did have ramps going up to the lobby. After, in our original lawsuit, CCDC sued the General Assembly in the early 90s. It was one of the first ADA suits, and they did build ramps, and they deliberately, because they were mad that we sued them, and one, made them ugly. They were pink. And so people didn't like them because they were pink and they were long and they were ugly. But we did have ramps and they tore them down to put up those stupid lifts. So that's a little history lesson. And I did want to just emphasize the whole issue of fiscal notes. And I don't know if it's an audit. I don't even know if this is like just a disability issue. I mean, I think it's not just a disability issue, but we also had this game played where CDHS said that they needed 500 hours of legal time to do a one-page form to help for people who had family members that were in a hospital and mentally ill, to be able to like deal with the release and to be able to give information, which is totally ludicrous. And so like that game does get played a lot, and it's very frustrating. Like, if you don't like a bill, just say you don't like a bill and deal with it on the merits. But that's and I'm glad that it says that you're going to say what a demographic note is, because most people are not going to know what that is unless you were one of the 15 people that were involved with the first demographic note bill, or one of the 15 people who's actually used demographic notes. I don't think they've been used a ton because legislators are so limited. So, but I do think that the ADA coordinator and what they were saying in the committee very, very clearly was someone independent needs to go out and verify, not just as someone, because the situation in Denver, what happened is a place was asked, are you ADA accessible? And the place was not they don't do, that's not their expertise. It is ADA accessible. It was a theater to go look for a patron. They didn't. So I think it was, again, not being very clear. And the other difference with the Denver thing is that it was a debate that was required to use the city fair elections fund. That is very different than like if some organ, if like the Chamber of Commerce holds a debate. And so I think and I think they should all be accessible. In terms of when we're saying, what does government have to do? There's a difference between when government, in Denver, I think is the only place that even has this. But I may be wrong, like with this fair election fund that like funds campaigns and where the government holds a debate or stages a debate. So I think Denver has some uniqueness. But so I don't know if we can by law, I mean, I think we can by law say a party shall, and I think we should be clear that it's all parties, not just the major parties. So like if the libertarians want to do something, like they need to be accessible. It's not just the Democrats and Republicans. And if we could, and I think, again, this isn't really, it would be more regulating. It's almost more of a Title III arena, but really, if anyone's holding a public debate that the public can go to, I think it's different when it's a private club, they're clearly exempted. But if someone's holding a debate and inviting the public, or even if they're not inviting the public, if it's not, they need to be accessible to the candidates. So I would like to maybe finesse that a little, because the Denver situation is just legally different than anywhere else in the state.
Julie, I really appreciate that. And one, I'm going to take your feedback to the group. Although we're already getting public feedback on this, we'll add that to this and encourage them to consider it as they go to develop ideas. I think this is also a great example where these committees, my intention is they're going to get it 80 to 90% of the way there. I think there's a substantive role that you all are going to have to play, saying they overlooked this, or Eric didn't push them on this, and we want to add that. So I appreciate the pushes and the feedback. I'm going to move us to housing and talk about where they are. And I'm moving so long because I want to get into a real conversation about where we go next on getting stakeholder input. Housing so far, the ideas that they have put out have focused on contracts, publications, and communications, and really have been focused on making sure that there is everything is accessible, it's plain language, and that there is information about the features of the units that is included in advertisements, included in listings, and they've added several ideas around collecting that information through additional processes. You'll see at the bottom of that document, because this is the running document we're using with them, we started then the conversation around data collection. We're continuing that. And in our conversation this week, we're then going to be moving around to the affordable and the accessible parts of it. And what are the financing mechanisms to get more units online? But their first focus, and Rep. Ortiz, this may have been one of the ones where I think you heard an idea that impressed you, if I recall right, around collecting information.
100%. That was the idea, to collect and present that information and make it mandatory to, like, we're not just listing features of apartments like, oh, it's got a gym, it's got this. It is also required to list accessible features, and not just of the individual units, but also of the place as a whole. There were like 2 or 3, so maybe I'm getting ideas confused, but there were 2 or 3 ideas put forward by the housing task force where I was like, man, that's good. This is another subcommittee that has really come into their own, because I was really concerned at first when the focus was on extended services and or transportation. And then it really felt like they focused and honed in, and that's when a lot of the good ideas started coming out.
Thank you, Representative. And I'll just flag, when you have a chance to go through these, they've got 9 ideas that just fall into this category of contracts, publications, and communications. And it ranges from requiring accessibility features to be listed in advertisements if they list any other features about the property. As the representative said, they talk about ways to collect additional data and to list the information. They also talk about the roles that government agencies could play in providing navigators to both property owners and property seekers to understand their rights and to understand what's out there. The next conversation, as I said, that they started was around data. Our first, or one of the charges in the legislation, was to identify what is the current inventory and need for affordable, accessible units, and what is that future need. And what they've started talking about is what are the additional data points that the state needs to be collecting, not just to know that today, but to stay on top of it and to use it to inform actions of the state going forward. So we're going to keep tightening up the data conversation, and then we're moving into the financing conversation. The last big one, and I'm moving along, but if there's something you want me to pause on, put your hand up virtually or just come off mute. We're a small enough group. The other one is the outdoor recreation. And I just want to flag for those who haven't been part of these conversations, outdoor rec in how these ideas are coming together has evolved. It's gotten feisty at times, it's gotten productive, and it's gotten creative. We started off focusing on what does the ski industry need to do. As we went through those ideas, I had a couple of members reach out and say some of these ideas apply to everything. If you're talking about accessible parking, it's not just a ski resort, it's going to be trailheads, it's going to be aquatic sports, it's going to be everything else. So we paused a little bit on posting those ideas that may apply to the ski industry, but may also apply to the others. And we started working through, so you'll see language here. For example, number 1 used to say, require operators of ski facilities to provide. We asked the question at our last meeting, does this also apply to, say, river sports where we are trying to put in kayaks? Does it apply to trailheads? So we're going through it that way. I also want to thank Rep Ortiz and some others who have put me in touch with a number of other people. And I think this is where it's gotten pretty interesting is Colorado has an outsized portion and role in the ski industry. So rather than letting the industry tell the state, is there an opportunity for us to really drive the thinking of the industry? And I'll name this, and then I'll invite Rep Ortiz and Mr. Stone in because they've been on some of these conversations. We have a real issue, for example, around ski lifts, who are governed by the code relating to, I guess it's ropeways and tramways. I may be getting the exact wording right or wrong there. They have a subcommittee, the ANSI B77 committee, that is looking specifically at the compatibility. They've got a disability subcommittee there and the ability to transport individuals with disabilities and their equipment on different types of lifts. They're probably a year and a half out from my last conversation with them from putting forward their recommendation. That said, thanks to members of this exec committee, I've spoken to people involved who don't have the highest confidence that they are rightfully and fully considering the rights of Coloradans with disabilities or the rights of all with disabilities, that they are being unduly influenced by some interests. And so it may not be fully appropriate for us to offer absolute deference. I'm not sharing this with me having an opinion. I'm sharing what I have heard. So over the next 2 weeks, we have, I think now, Carrie, 5 or 6 different conversations with different members of the board, including one that Rep Ortiz connected me with manufacturers, with people that run adaptive programs to sort through all of that. So this one's just, it's a little more complex. At the same time, I've been really inspired by some of the aspirational ideas, ideas around ensuring people have access to information about what is accessible about that recreational facility. We talk about, ski trails are rated blue, green, black diamond, whatever. What do we know about the accessibility features of whether it's a place to put your kayak in, a hiking trail, a climbing route, or these ski facilities? There's been some really interesting ideas. I'm not going to rehash all of them. You'll see 10 ideas that continue to be shaped around all recreation. And then we do still have a number of ideas specific to the ski industry. Our intent with this group, it's evolved. Instead of putting ideas as they come up, we're going through now 3 rounds of conversation: ski, water sport, and other open air sports, seeing which of these ideas apply to all of them. We'll get those up, and then we'll put up ideas that are sport specific. But Rep Ortiz, we've had some passionate conversations about this and with members. Your thoughts on these discussions so far?
Yeah, I just want to start out there for thanking you for your, because this is where your mediating work has really, and your mediating expertise has really come to the forefront and shown itself. So I don't think we would have gotten into a good spot with a lot of these discussions without your interjection, because the bottom line is, and there's one member on that committee that has always operated in bad faith with me. I'm just going to be quite frank. from the very beginning of running these bills. And you found a way to make it productive and to get us to these ideas. So just want right off the top, I want to start off by thanking you for that. On some of the things that you talked about, and just because inside baseball for the executive committee that might not be clear is, I felt like originally the idea of, well, what about the other areas? Not just ski resorts, what about the other areas? Was the same attitude where when I ran a bill about car rental companies needing to list and make their accessible features rentable on a website instead of a separate but not equal number, the car rental companies were the first one to be like, what about the peer-to-peer rental like Turo and Get a Ride? It wasn't in good faith. They were just like, why are you going after us? You have to go after everyone at the same time. And that's not true. Okay, so that's where I felt like it was coming from. And I just want to point out to everybody on this call that ski resorts are different than state parks or than entry into waterways or than entry into hiking trails, because ski resorts are manned in a way that some of these other places are not. And not only that, almost every mountain has an adaptive ski program attached to them, right? Breckenridge has Breckenridge Outdoor Education Center, BOEC. Winter Park has NSCD. Telluride has TAPS, right? Every Eldora has Ignite. Every mountain has an accessible ski program that has equipment, that has staff, and that can give lessons. Not every outdoor space has that. So we need to understand that there are different animals when we're dealing with different areas. So this idea that we need to go after, sure, we need to make all areas accessible. On the general point, I completely agree with that. But how you do that is different because it is different realities for different areas. When Barrick was talking about how we should be guiding that ship as one of the prominent areas that has one of the most skiable number of mountains when it comes to ski lifts in particular, and I want to give a call out to Sharon. He was one that said that and said it well, because there was one person, again, going back to this person, that was like, if we do this, and y'all that are disabled will know this same old tire talking point, if we do this, people will stop doing business in Colorado, or they will stop selling ski lifts to Colorado, which is total horse crap, and we all know that. And then Sharon came in with, why aren't we guiding this train? We have so much leverage here that we are not utilizing. We could be guiding the industry in good faith, not in a punitive way, but in good faith, to influence that ski lifts become accessible around the world, not just for Colorado, but we can be the tip of the spear. So, shout out to him. And then, just going back to Barrick's work, I mean, there's good ideas that are coming from everywhere. Even this, what I would call this bad faith actor that I've had to work with on the subcommittee, she brought forward an idea of, what if we, there are programs like DU and CU that have programs around education, master's programs around access in the outdoors. And I actually guest taught at DU's program. And she didn't go so far as making it a requirement, but she brought forward that idea where, saying that is best practices, that someone on your staff must have this certification, which I thought was a great idea and a good start. But a midpoint would be evaluating that and see if not making a mandate has been working. And then in doing that, looking at those places where leadership has that certification and how accessible have they become because of that. And if that's the best practice, then let's just make it a requirement anyways, right? So there's a lot of good conversations happening around here. This is my arena because, when it came to being newly disabled and getting my life back before I launched into politics, it was about the outdoors, and it was getting outdoors and recreating with people. So, it's been great to be a part of this subcommittee in general. There's been tough moments, but Barrick and Carrie have done amazing work to make it the productive subcommittee that it has gotten to. I mean, bad blood is still going to be bad blood. I am not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, this person even tried to take credit for the work on the B-77 task force, which did not move at all until I almost passed that bill 2 years ago, right? And then this member that Barrick is talking about is giving Barrick the inside scoop about what it's like to be the only disabled member of this B-77 subcommittee, and how little he gets listened to and how much they try and write him off. So it's been a really productive and eye-opening experience for everyone involved to go down this road together. I think we're going to get there, and we wouldn't be able to get there without the mediating work that's coming from Barrick and Carrie. So just want to name that.
Representative, thank you very much. And I appreciate you. You and I have been very real with each other throughout. I appreciate you continuing to push me and the faith you're putting in us. Michael, as an athlete and somebody who's been on some of these calls, any reflections on what you're hearing from the outdoor rec group?
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. Uh, on outside of the ski industry, on the last subcommittee meeting for the outdoor subcommittee, to specifically, some of there's some programs that have been are going on the state. So I really like the idea of reaching out, for example, to the Department of Natural Resources, Department of Wildlife. So some of these other areas that have been brought to the attention of this group, specific to trail access, hiking, and as well as water sports, and really reaching out to them to see if we could, what to do with these programs. There was some ideas that this was new. They've been doing some of these programs for a while. Maybe they've been idle. Maybe they need to be revitalized. But this might be a very good time to do that. And I'm not exactly sure how to reach out and to whom. I do have some contacts that I could give directly to you. I'm sure everybody else on this call does as well. But I like the idea that they've been exploring all aspects of outdoor recreation. And it really has been, I mean, Rep Ortiz gave some great shout outs. I would say that this group has really been absolutely phenomenal with that and staying on task.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to move us in about 2 minutes into a discussion about the stakeholder engagement strategy, where we are, why we're approaching it the way we are, and how we can support all of you. I do also want to be very transparent about 3 different interactions we've had with different folks. 2 of our people with lived experience, who members of the task force referred to us, and I want you to know about them, that we've had them join. One was a family that Julie put us in touch with from Routt County, who was dealing with a situation where they had a young son, an amazing kid who I had the chance to talk with, who just wants to, he's got cerebral palsy, and he's wanted to go to summer camp there where they live in Steamboat. And of all of the programs, summer camps in the county, only one was willing to even consider accepting him. And that one was requiring the family to provide a personal aid. And I'm not going to get into all of the details, but they didn't feel it was a reasonable request. And the camp was not offering any accommodations. In fact, when they went back and said, other than telling us we can hire an aide and pay the summer camp fee, what accommodations are you willing to offer? The camp's answer was basically none, and we don't think we need to. When we looked at it, it initially sounded like an outdoor recreation thing, because the kid, Wilder, just wanted to play outside. As we talked a little bit more, it looked like it may have some things for the rewrite committee to discuss when we talk about accommodations. So they joined just today. It was fantastic for the group to get to engage with them. We'll probably also talk with Outdoor Rec, because the rewrite subcommittee thinks there may be some places to tighten up definitions and to be clearer about what is required, what is an undue burden, what are reasonable accommodations. The Outdoor Rec program or committee has also talked not just about laws, but about what are some incentives or public-private partnerships that may be able to come together. So that one will continue. Not asking for anything in particular, just want you all to be aware of it. On a totally different one, one that Chanda, who is on our government subcommittee, and I believe Julie had been emailing about and may have been involved from the outside, relates to health providers and whether there were a sufficient number of providers that are accessible. And there are still things we're sorting out around how much of this lies at HCPF, how much of this is about enforcement of existing laws, and how much of this is the rightful access and full access to government services. So I believe CCDC and others and Chanda Hinton are continuing to work on this on the advocacy side and providing support. That issue is also now in front of the government subcommittee, who's talking about it in terms of basic access and access to government services. So just keeping you apprised of that. What I do want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about stakeholder engagement. We have a very tricky balance to strike. On the one hand, engaging stakeholders can be a challenge. Engaging stakeholders 2 and 3 times can be even more difficult. So when we are rolling out ideas on a rolling basis, I'm asking stakeholders, I'm asking all of you to engage your networks when the first batch of ideas are out there, when the next batch get out in a few weeks. We're trying to limit it to 2 batches of ideas from each subcommittee. You might think, wouldn't it be easier if you just put them all up at once? Here was the reason we decided not to. Each of these topics are ending up with anywhere from 6 to 10 ideas. We need to get thoughtful input around all of those. What we didn't want to do is deluge people with, here are 50 ideas on government services and 48 ideas on recreation, and have it be so much that we didn't get much response to it. So we're putting them up in these pieces, clearly labeling that these are ideas relating to running for office, or these are ideas about housing contracts. We're going to try to do each committee, as I said, in 2 batches. I want to talk with all of you about how we can best support you, what you would need from us, and what ideas you have for us and for the team at DORA to get word out about these. I will be very transparent. We got the housing and the government ideas up, Carrie, I want to say 2 weeks ago or so, coming on 2 weeks. We got links to that to every subcommittee member. I don't know that we've had a single comment yet. So I would love to get your thoughts on what we can provide to you to help get word out about it. Is it short links? Is it a 2 or 3 sentence overview of why? Is it draft language? And where else would you like us to go share this information, whether that's social media or other places? Julie, jump in, please.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, like I said earlier, I would like messaging, like again, like here's what you put in the email that so like we can send that to like our communications people, like maybe a email and a social that says, here's what this committee is, here's what we're looking for, here's where you go. I think once someone gets to engage Dora, if they can like get to the right place, it's pretty easy. But most people don't know what Engage Dora is. So like just something explaining what this is and what you're looking for, because most people aren't going to know. In the email or in the communication would say, here are the topic areas.
I appreciate that.
Something like that. And then I think, like I could send it to every disability org and they could all just shoot it out directly. I think if we're not trying to each say a different thing or say it a different way, it'll work a lot better. And that's what I was waiting for. That's why I haven't sent it out, is because I wasn't even, and I agree, if we keep having like different messages, it's just going to confuse people, or people might say, oh, I did that. So if the communication can say, these are going to be continuously updated, but there's some things open for comment now,
Perfect.
That would be really helpful.
Julie, I have just blocked an hour on my calendar tomorrow morning to get that written, and we will get that out to everybody by end of day tomorrow. Other thoughts on things we can provide or places that you would suggest we share this information? Julie.
Yeah, I mean, so like, again, my world is the disability world. So like I can, we can share it there, people from our community, but I think it should also go to all of the lobbyists that we think are going to oppose us. Like it should go to the business community, it should go to the ski people, like it. And I don't know who has access to all of those lists. But like, I don't know if there's a way to send it to the whole lobby corps, or,
I will have I will tell you that the Denver and the state chambers have been joining calls. We're also maintaining, and you reminded me of this, Carrie and I are maintaining an interested parties list. So if there are folks that you say, hey, make sure these people get it, Carrie and I are emailing that list each time ideas are posted. So we've gone to the chambers. I know a number of lobbyists at the bigger firms, and we'll reach out to them. If you folks know of firms other than, I'll reach out to Capital Solutions, to CRL, and to Seawald Handling. If there are others you think represent business interests that we should reach out to, let us know. I'll also, when Carrie and I check in with the team at DORA, we'll workshop this with them. Lieutenant Governor.
Municipal.
Thank you. Yes, we'll make sure we follow up with CML, who ran or is running an article, a piece from our chair and vice chair.
Wondering if we know of any news outlets that are friendly to this type of a cause. Because just within the last month, I'd say, I've been contacted twice about our Colorado Disability Funding Committee, where we auction off the license plates, and they put out a little, little something, little 3-minute blurb on news or something like that. They did the same thing with Family last week, the theater production group. So if we could get it out more broadly, because, I think it's nice to use our networks, but we're still singing to the choir. And it would be nice to get some new ideas, I think, if we can possibly do that.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I'll talk with Dora and see if their PIO has any capacity. With your permission, I'll also talk with Josh in your office and see if we might be able to tap some comms expertise in the Gov's office.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Hi, Jennifer Harpel. I can also disseminate more in the business community, right, through Colorado Chamber and its members, and through some of the companies I do work for.
Appreciate that. And so I'll get out to you by end of day tomorrow, some simple language you can personalize and the links for that. We are at the time for public comment. I have not yet gotten any requests. This is the one place where I will say, use the chat. Shoot Carrie Steele or me, Barrick Abramson, a note in the chat if you're a member of the public who would like to speak to the executive committee of the task force. At this point, I am not seeing any indications of interest for public comment. I don't have an interest in keeping you on longer than we have to, although I do love the conversation. What I am going to do is just go around to each member of the executive committee and give you the opportunity for either closing thoughts or wishes for Carrie or me. Before I do, I do want to share one experience so you all are aware of it and so we can all align on this. We did have a member a member of the public who was referred to the task force and one of our subcommittees. Somewhere along the line, there was a miscommunication, and this woman who is an individual with a disability, she is deaf and joined. She thought she had been referred to join the actual task force. And there was a little bit of an awkward back and forth when we said that the conversation was for members of the subcommittee. She was under the impression that by joining the call, she was a member of the subcommittee. So you all know, because I will always be transparent with you, she was pretty frustrated during the call and sent Carrie and I an email to that effect, that she felt marginalized and not heard because we limited her interaction with the committee to the public comment period at the end. She said that her usual accommodation request is to have someone available in the chat to her on Zoom meetings throughout the meeting. In this case, we had not been aware of that. We did happen to have an ASL interpreter on the call to support one of our members. She didn't seem to want to engage with them, so Carrie spent the chat engaging with her and offered to read her comments during the public comment period. But I want to be very transparent with all of you. She was frustrated by that. It raises two things for me. One, I want to make sure that we are all clear on when the public can engage. I'm open to, if all of you want to give me guidance. Her feeling was that by not allowing her to speak until the end, her thoughts couldn't be considered in the conversation. I'm open if you want to provide me guidance to allow public comment at the start of the meeting. I will tell you as a facilitator, it will be impossible to have public comment weigh in throughout the meeting on a real-time basis, just as we've limited even your participation in subcommittees. And it would become pretty burdensome if we allowed the multiple points. That said, I want to make sure that people are feeling valued and heard. The other thing it raises for me is we happen to have an ASL interpreter on that call because of a member. If we didn't have that member, we would not have, which might have created a further accessibility concern. So I will look to you for guidance on if you want us to work with Dora to shift our approach of when we have those interpreters available. Julie, I know I kept talking after you put your hand up. I just wanted to share the situation, but let me invite you in.
Well, so she's not deaf, which is why she didn't want to engage with the sign language interpreter.
Okay.
She has a speech disability.
I didn't
Her
understand
hearing's
that, so
fine.
thank you.
Yeah. And so I think what could have prevented it is for there to be something very, very clear. And I don't even know how, I mean, to be honest, because I get all the stuff, like to say, if you need an accommodation to participate, here's where you go, because she could have very clearly said, here's what I need. And it might have been letting her use the chat. I think that would have solved it. Using the chat is, I mean, I know it can be an issue for some people with screen readers, although I know lots of people with screen readers who do fine with it, but using the chat is an accommodation for some people. And so I think not a lot, like kind of that hard line. And then there are people that, because the way she communicates, she says something and then her translator will repeat it for her that she has with her. Like it's a speech disability. So it has to be a translator she knows. Or she can type stuff into a chat, but she can't, so I think that's maybe what the issue is to make sure that we have a way for someone to say, here's the accommodation I need, and not just about a sign language interpreter, because it's about more than that. So
I appreciate that, Julie. I will, when we check in with Dora this week, I will figure out what we can do to put up on the site an easy way for people to make note of any accommodation. I think the only place where I do have some concern, and I'll let Rep. Ortiz speak, and then Julie, come back to you if you'd like. We're happy to have someone engage with them in the chat at the points for public comment. I don't know that it's appropriate for us to have one member of the public able to engage throughout if we're telling others it's going to be limited to the public comment period. But I take my guidance from you all.
Yeah. I mean, you could type something in the chat and not hit enter until it's public comment time.
Yeah. Rep. Ortiz.
Yeah, and Julie, I mean, obviously, but this is a secret that people don't really understand, is that like people like Julie and Hillary and Jack, these individuals that have been doing this work longer since I've been disabled, are really my bosses. So if Julie tells me something different, then I'll retract what I'm about to say. But I agree with Barrick in that like equitable treatment is about everyone being able to participate when we designate the time, right? And as much as I would love to have the public give their thoughts throughout, we wouldn't be able to get our work done. The subcommittee that has been tasked for the work and that has been picked, that applied and that has been picked, wouldn't be able to get their work done. So I agree with Barrick that we keep it at the end, that public comment should be at the end, but that it's made very clear somewhere. Maybe there's a misunderstanding of, because I don't know whether it's a misunderstanding that this was always the intent or whether it's just someone wanting more say and being upset that they don't have it. To which I would say there's disabled representation in the subcommittees. They applied and got selected for it, and you have to respect that. That's how we're going to get work done. And maybe I could be the one to be the bridge to say that to them, or to just engage with them and state, this is how we're going to get our work done. Take notes as you hear things throughout, because that's what I do. I mean, it was a little tough to limit executive committee input to only beginning, middle, and end. And what made it more difficult was the fact that it was a bad faith actor that went crying to Barrick that spurred that. But it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And it's making the subcommittees effective and efficient. So however that needs to be communicated with the public when they have heartburn with it, let's work together on that, Barrick. Because, if me being in the executive committee can put up with that, then, they need to understand that this is how we get our input, but also how we keep the committees effective and able to do their job and on task.
Yeah, and Carrie shot me a note. Carrie's going to go ahead and get working on the website to bring it to the forefront what the schedule is for when public comment and the ability to request those accommodations. So we'll make sure we do that. The other thing that
I also think she usually gets an accommodation for more time because she has to go through a translator. And so I think I think it was a combination of you can't use the chat and you can't talk whenever. And so I think if it was, yes, you can have double time, you know, because she just needs it for like, so if most people get 2 minutes, she probably needs 5. But, and then to be really clear of when you can do it. And if you want to use the chat, you can do it, but not until it's public comment time.
No, I appreciate that, Julie, and more than happy to provide her the additional time. I think that the primary thing, and I don't want to pick on this individual, it's going to be for anyone that public comment is going to happen during public comment time. That said, I'm just going to put this idea out today and I will pick it back up with you next month, although I welcome response right now. Harry raised the suggestion to me on some other work groups we've managed. We held dedicated listening sessions outside of subcommittees, so we could have extended public input. I know people feel like, hey, Barrick, you're putting 10 minutes at the end. That could be limiting if you have 10 or 20 people. So one idea for all of you to consider is to tell Carrie and I to go hold a couple of 1 hour, 2 hour sessions that are solely dedicated to hearing public comment, not to committee meetings, but to just to learning and listening sessions. So that's something that we're prepared to do if you all as a group think that's going to make sense. With that, it is 5 minutes till. Julie, I appreciate you both clarifying for me and giving us some guidance on better ways to engage, and we will do that. Would anybody like to offer final thoughts or just your reflections on today's conversation and where we are so far? Rep Ortiz, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to thank the executive committee for being amazing partners on this. You know, from the top, I got to thank Barry. I felt like we've all learned together, and I really felt like you guys are hitting your stride and making sure that we're able to disagree without being disagreeable. It shows now, like the ideas that are starting to come from the subcommittee that speak to y'all's work. I want to thank the subcommittee members, and I do every time I'm on there, but to the executive committee, like, it's impressive. For those of you that have been there, you understand. You've seen the changes in some of the subcommittees from 5 months ago till now, and it's been really great to see that change. I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for her tireless work for decades supporting our community, but also in lending all of that and the weight of her leadership to this task force in general. You know, I don't think we would have even gotten here without that support and still be here without that support. So I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor and her team. Special shout out to Josh. I see you on here. It's powerful and it's uplifting. I know I'm pretty tough on everyone around me and myself. You know, it's not limited just everyone around me. But it's going to be amazing to see the work that we get from the subcommittee. It's been heartening to see we're on the way there. It's going great. Keep it up. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Representative. Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to give you the final words this afternoon.
This sounds like a mutual admiration society, but it wouldn't be here without Rep Ortiz either. So I know personally I'm going to miss him as the voice on the House floor for people with disabilities. We obviously don't often have that. I think Rep Ortiz is the first. So, and then once upon a time I went to Harvard to John F. Kennedy School of whatever. And I remember one of the professors was saying that, you know, if you're passionate about what you do, you're going to step on people's toes. And then he also asked the question, have you ever met a passionate moderate? So those questions have stuck with me for decades. So anyway, thanks for everybody's passion.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Rep Ortiz. Thank you all. As promised, I will get you language tomorrow to send out to folks about the ideas, and we will see you again in a month. Anything comes up prior to that next meeting, you've got my cell phone, you've got our emails, reach out to us. But thank you all very much.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.